The first thing you should know is that I never believed in intuition. Whenever people talked about trusting their gut, I always assumed they were just finding a nicer way to describe anxiety. Maybe something felt off. Maybe they were nervous. Maybe they were making assumptions. But every time I heard someone say, I had a bad feeling, I usually roll my eyes. At least I did until a few years ago. Now I'm not so sure. Because there was a period of about 3 months where a single bad feeling ended up changing my entire life. And what scares me is how close I came to ignoring it. At the time, I was 28 years old and working as a leasing agent for a large apartment complex. The property had almost 300 units spread across several buildings. It wasn't luxury housing, but it was nice. Young professionals, college students, small families, mostly ordinary people trying to get through life. I enjoyed the job. Most days involved showing apartments, answering emails, handling maintenance requests, and helping new tenants move in. Nothing exciting, nothing dangerous. At least that's how it started. One Thursday afternoon in late October, I was working alone in the leasing office. My manager had left early for an appointment. The maintenance supervisor was across the property dealing with a plumbing issue. The office was quiet. I was answering emails when the front door opened. A man walked inside. At first glance, he looked completely normal. Maybe mid-30s. Clean clothes. Clean haircut. Friendly smile. The kind of person you wouldn't think twice about. He approached my desk and asked about apartment availability. I gave him the usual information. Prices. Floor plans. Lease terms. The same conversation I had 10 times a day. But for some reason, I felt uneasy. Not scared. Not threatened. Just uncomfortable. It was subtle. The kind of feeling you can't really explain. He smiled the entire time. Made polite conversation. Asked reasonable questions. Yet something about him felt rehearsed. Like he was playing a role. The interaction lasted maybe 15 minutes. Then he thanked me and left. The second the door closed behind him, I felt relief, which immediately struck me as ridiculous. Nothing had happened. The man hadn't said anything strange, hadn't acted aggressive, hadn't done anything wrong. So why did I feel better once he was gone? I brushed it off and continued working. The next day he came back. That wasn't unusual. Potential renters often returned with additional questions. This time he introduced himself as Daniel. We talked for another 20 minutes. Again, everything seemed normal, but the feeling returned. That same quiet discomfort, like something wasn't right. He eventually left without submitting an application. Again, a few days later, he returned. Then again the following week, and the week after that. At first I assumed he was simply indecisive. Some people spend months apartment hunting, but after nearly a month, he still hadn't applied for a unit. Yet he kept showing up, always asking questions, always smiling, always finding reasons to continue conversations. The strange thing was that he never seemed interested in the apartments themselves. Instead, he seemed interested in me, not in an obvious flirtatious way, just curious. Too curious. Questions about my schedule. Questions about how long I'd worked there. Questions about whether I lived nearby. Questions about who usually closed the office. Nothing inappropriate individually, but together it started feeling strange. I became careful about what I shared. Eventually my manager noticed. One afternoon after Daniel left, she asked if everything was okay. I laughed it off, told her he just made me uncomfortable for some reason. She watched him walk across the parking lot through the office window. Then she surprised me. I don't like him either. That immediately got my attention. When I asked why, she couldn't explain it. Just a feeling. The exact same thing I had been experiencing. For a while, nothing happened. Daniel continued stopping by occasionally. Then winter arrived, and things began changing. It started with small incidents. Little things. Easy things to dismiss. One morning I arrived at work and found a coffee sitting outside the office door. Still warm. No receipt. Nothing. I assumed another employee left it there. Nobody had. The next week it happened again. Different coffee. Same situation. Again, nobody claimed responsibility. The third time, I threw it away immediately. Something about it felt wrong. A few days later, I noticed a vehicle parked across from the leasing office. A dark SUV. Nothing unusual there, except it stayed all day. From opening until closing. The vehicle never moved. The driver never got out. I mentioned it to maintenance. They checked. By the time they walked over, the SUV was gone. It had appeared again the following week. And again, always far enough away to avoid attention. Always gone before anyone else could get a good look. The unsettling feeling I'd had around Daniel started growing. I found myself checking parking lots, checking mirrors, paying attention to things I normally ignored. Still, I had no proof anything was wrong, only a feeling. Then came a first truly strange incident. It happened on a Tuesday night. I had worked late handling lease paperwork. By the time I left the office, it was nearly 7. Dark outside. Cold. The parking lot was mostly empty. I locked the office and walked toward my car. Halfway there, I noticed someone standing near the edge of the property, watching. At least that's what it looked like. The person stood beneath a streetlight near one of the apartment buildings, completely still. I couldn't make out details, just a silhouette. I stopped walking. The figure didn't move. Neither did I. For several seconds, we simply stared at each other across the parking lot. Then headlights passed between us. When they cleared, the person was gone. Just gone. I scanned the area. Nothing. No one. I got in my car and left immediately. The entire drive home, I tried convincing myself I was overreacting. Maybe the person simply walked away. Maybe I'd lost sight of them. There were countless explanations, yet I couldn't shake the feeling. The following morning, I arrived at work early. As I unlocked the office door, something caught my eye. A folded piece of paper wedged beneath the handle. My stomach tightened immediately. I pulled it free. There was no envelope, no signature, just a handwritten message. It said, "You're prettier when your hair is down." I stared at the note, completely frozen, because the previous day had been the first time in months I'd worn my hair down at work. Nobody else knew how unsettling that message felt. Not at first. To everyone else, it seemed like a creepy compliment. To me, it felt different, because it meant someone had been paying attention. Close attention. My manager contacted police. An officer came out, took a report, asked questions. Unfortunately, there wasn't much they could do. No cameras cover that area. No fingerprints. No witnesses. Just a note. The officer suggested remaining cautious. That was it. Over the next 2 weeks, additional notes appeared. Nothing threatening, which somehow made them worse. Messages about clothing, comments about conversations I'd had, references to little details from specific days. Things only someone watching closely would know. The realization slowly settled over me. Someone wasn't occasionally observing me. Someone was monitoring me. Regularly. The question was who? And deep down, I already suspected the answer. Daniel. I couldn't prove it, but every instinct screamed his name. Then he disappeared. Completely. No visits. No phone calls. No sightings. Nothing. Weeks passed. The notes stopped. The SUV vanished. Everything became normal again. I should have been relieved. Instead, I became paranoid, because it felt wrong. Like the silence itself meant something. Then one Saturday evening, I found out why. I had gone grocery shopping after work. Nothing exciting, just a normal trip. I returned home around 6, carried groceries inside, started putting everything away. Then I noticed something. One of my kitchen cabinets was open. That sounds insignificant, but I lived alone, and I always closed cabinet doors. Always. I stared at it for several seconds, trying to remember whether I'd left it open. Maybe, maybe not. I closed it and continued unpacking. Then I noticed another cabinet, also open, then a drawer, slightly pulled out. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I walked through the apartment, slowly, carefully. Nothing looked stolen. Nothing appeared damaged. Yet things felt wrong, subtly wrong, like someone had touched things, moved things, been there. I checked every room. Nobody. Nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I called maintenance. They checked the locks. Everything appeared fine. No signs of forced entry. No explanation. Life moved on again, at least for another week. Then I came home from work and discovered something sitting on my kitchen table. A photograph. Just one photograph. The image showed me leaving the leasing office. The photo had clearly been taken from across the parking lot. My blood ran cold, because I had never seen that photograph before, meaning someone had entered my apartment, again, and left it there, intentionally. I called police immediately. This time they took things far more seriously. Officers searched my apartment, collected evidence, reviewed security footage from nearby businesses. Unfortunately, they still had almost nothing to work with, until one officer asked a simple question. Has anyone made you uncomfortable recently? I immediately thought of Daniel. The officer asked for his information. I provided everything I had. Name, phone number, application history, vehicle description, all of it. An investigation began. A few days later, police contacted me. Daniel's application information was fake. Every part of it. The address, the employment records, the references, none of it was real. The phone number had been disconnected. The vehicle registration led nowhere. Essentially, the man didn't exist, at least not under that name. That information terrified me more than anything else, because it meant Daniel never intended to rent an apartment. He had another reason for being there. The following weeks were miserable. I stayed with family, changed routines, checked mirrors constantly, barely slept. Every unknown vehicle made me nervous. Every unexpected sound made my heart race. Then, one night, everything finally came to a head. I was staying at my sister's house. Around midnight, her dog started barking, relentlessly. The kind of bark that instantly tells you something's wrong. We looked outside. Nothing. The dog continued. Then my sister noticed movement near the backyard fence. A person, standing there, watching the house. Police arrived within minutes. The figure ran. Officers chased him into nearby woods. For the first time, they caught him. And yes, it was Daniel, or at least the man I knew as Daniel. The truth turned out to be even worse than I imagined. The man had been arrested previously for stalking multiple women in different states. He used fake identities, moved frequently, targeted women he encountered through ordinary daily interactions, then slowly inserted himself into their lives. Watching, following, obsessing. Investigators eventually discovered hundreds of photographs, notes, schedules, information collected about multiple victims, including me. The investigation revealed something that still bothers me today. The very first day Daniel entered the leasing office, he wasn't apartment hunting. He had specifically come there looking for me. He had seen me weeks earlier while visiting the property. Everything after that was intentional. Every conversation, every question, every visit, every note. The realization made me sick, because what I originally dismissed as a vague, uncomfortable feeling had actually been warning me. Next story. I used to work nights for a company that serviced ATM machines around the city. Most people assume that means fixing them, but my job was a little more boring than that. I wasn't a technician. I was basically security and transportation. When a machine needed maintenance, upgrades, or cash replenishment, I would accompany the technician, help move equipment, document everything, and make sure nobody bothered us while we worked. It paid surprisingly well. The downside was the schedule. Most of the work happened after businesses closed. Shopping plazas, grocery stores, strip malls, gas stations. The city looked completely different after midnight. Places that were packed with people during the day suddenly felt abandoned. You start noticing things. Cars that sit in parking lots for too long. People standing where nobody should be standing. Movement in places that should be empty. After about 2 years on a job, I thought I'd seen every weird thing imaginable. Then I met Darren. And looking back, I wish I had trusted my instincts the first time I saw him. The night started normally. I was working with a technician named Mike. We had 6 locations scheduled. The first 4 were routine. Nothing unusual happened. By around 2:30 in the morning, we arrived at a small grocery store on the outskirts of town. The store had closed at midnight. The parking lot was almost completely empty. Only 3 vehicles remained. Our armored van, an employee vehicle, and an old dark-colored pickup truck parked near the edge of the property. I noticed it immediately, mostly because it looked abandoned. The truck was parked far away from the building. No lights, no movement, Nobody inside that I could see. Probably an employee, Mike said. I shrugged. Maybe. We grabbed our equipment and entered through the side entrance. The store manager let us in and headed home. That left just Mike and me. The maintenance would take about 45 minutes. I stayed near the front entrance while Mike worked on the machine. The entire store felt strange. Huge empty aisles, dim overnight lighting, silence. The kind of silence that makes every little sound seem louder. About 20 minutes into the job, I happened to glance through the front windows. The pickup truck had moved. Not far, just closer, maybe 30 feet closer. I frowned. I was certain it hadn't been there before. I walked toward the glass. The truck sat motionless. Engine off. No headlights. No visible driver. Just sitting there, watching. At least that's how it felt. I didn't mention it. People move their vehicles all the time. There was no reason to make something out of nothing. By the time we finished, the truck was gone. I figured that was the end of it. It wasn't. 3 nights later, Mike and I were assigned another route. Different side of town, different stores, completely unrelated schedule. At around 1 a.m., we pulled into a pharmacy parking lot. As soon as we stopped, I noticed a familiar vehicle. The same pickup truck, parked across the street. My stomach tightened. The odds felt strange. Maybe it wasn't the same truck. Maybe I was imagining things. But something about it bothered me. I pointed it out to Mike. He looked. Looks like every truck I've ever seen. Maybe you're turning paranoid. He laughed. I tried laughing too, but the feeling didn't leave. We finished the job. When we exited the pharmacy 20 minutes later, the truck was gone again. A week passed. Then 2. Nothing happened. Eventually, I stopped thinking about it. Until a location downtown changed everything. It was around 3:15 in the morning. The ATM was located inside a large office building. The building had multiple floors, but our machine sat in the lobby. We entered using an access code provided by management. The lobby was empty. The streets outside were empty. Everything seemed normal. Mike began working. I sat near the entrance. About 10 minutes later, I noticed movement outside. A man, standing across the street. Just standing there. Not walking. Not using his phone. Not smoking. Nothing. Just standing. Watching the building. At first I couldn't see his face. Then a passing vehicle briefly illuminated him. My stomach dropped. It was Darren. At least that's what I would later learn his name was. Back then, he was just a stranger. A tall man. Dark jacket. Baseball cap. Motionless. Watching. I kept expecting him to leave. He didn't. 20 minutes passed. Still there. 30 minutes. Still there. I finally told Mike. He glanced outside. That's weird, right? Maybe homeless. He hasn't moved. Mike stared for a moment, then shrugged. Let's finish and go. When we exited the building, the man was gone. No sign of him. No vehicle. Nothing. Just empty streets. The next few weeks became increasingly uncomfortable. I started seeing him everywhere. Not every night. Just enough. A parking lot. A gas station. Across the street from a grocery store. Always watching. Never approaching. Never speaking. Always disappearing before I could do anything. The strange thing was that he never seemed interested in me personally. He watched the van. He watched the locations. He watched the ATM work. Sometimes he appeared before we arrived. Sometimes after. Almost like he knew our schedule. That realization terrified me. Our routes weren't public. Very few people knew where we'd be. I mentioned it to management. They took it seriously, at least initially. Security reviewed reports, checked schedules, looked through camera footage. A few locations actually captured images of him. The same man, same clothes, same truck, but he never committed a crime. He never trespassed, never threatened anyone. Legally, there wasn't much they could do. The police agreed. Watching people wasn't illegal, even if it was creepy. A month later, things escalated. Mike and I were servicing an ATM inside a shopping plaza. The machine sat near a side entrance. From where I stood, I could see most of the parking lot. Around 2:45 a.m., Darren arrived. This time he didn't stay across the lot. He parked directly beside our van. I watched him through the glass. He shut off the engine, then just sat there, not moving, not leaving, just sitting. For 15 minutes, 20, 30, I finally walked outside. Part of me wanted answers. Part of me was tired of being nervous. The moment I stepped through the doors, Darren started his truck and drove away. That bothered me more than if he'd stayed. It felt intentional, like he knew exactly what he was doing. The next morning, I filed another report. Management finally agreed something was wrong. An internal investigation started. What they discovered made everything worse. Several other crews had noticed Darren too. Not just Mike and me. Different routes, different cities. Same man, same truck, same behavior. Watching ATM crews, watching armored vehicles, watching cash transfers. Nobody knew why. The company notified law enforcement. Again, there wasn't much evidence, but at least now people were paying attention. A few weeks later, something happened that changed the entire situation. Mike quit, not because of Darren. His wife got a job in another state. He moved away. I got assigned a new partner named Eric. Eric had military experience. Nothing seemed to bother him. The first time I told him about Darren, he laughed. Until he saw him. Then he stopped laughing. The encounter happened around 4 a.m. We were finishing a job at a convenience store. As we walked back to the van, Eric froze. "Who's that?" I looked. Darren stood beside his truck. The first time either of us had seen him outside the vehicle. He wasn't doing anything, just standing, watching us. The distance between us couldn't have been more than 80 feet. I expected him to leave. Instead, he stayed. Eric started walking toward him. Darren immediately got into his truck, then drove away. No confrontation, no explanation, nothing. Eric looked genuinely unsettled. That guy isn't right. I know, no normal person does this. No, for the first time, someone actually understood why I was worried. A month later came the night I'll never forget. Our route took us into a neighboring county. One location remained, a small bank branch outside city limits. The area was rural, almost no traffic, no nearby businesses, just woods and darkness. We arrived around 3:30 a.m. Everything seemed normal. The bank manager had already left. We entered using security credentials. Eric worked on the machine. I monitored the entrance. At some point, I noticed something unusual. The parking lot was empty, but a faint light appeared beyond the tree line. Headlights, hidden among the woods. My pulse quickened. I walked closer to the glass. The light disappeared. I immediately knew. Darren. It had to be. I called Eric over. We watched for several minutes. Nothing. Maybe I imagined it. Then the headlights appeared again, deeper among the trees. Stationary. Watching. Eric called our supervisor. The supervisor contacted local police. We were instructed to remain inside until officers arrived. The wait felt endless. Every shadow outside seemed alive. Every sound made me jump. About 15 minutes later, something moved near the drive-through lanes. A figure, walking toward the building. Slowly, purposefully. Darren. For the first time, he wasn't hiding. He approached the glass doors, stopped, and looked directly at us. I had never seen his face clearly before. He looked exhausted, unshaven, older than I expected. His eyes seemed hollow, not angry, not aggressive, just empty. He pressed something against the glass, then turned around and walked away. No attempt to enter, no words, nothing, just left. Police arrived minutes later. They searched the area. The truck was found abandoned half a mile away. But Darren was gone. The object he left against the glass turned out to be a photograph. A photograph of one of our armored vans, taken from the woods. The date on the back was from nearly 8 months earlier. Everyone realized then that whatever Darren was doing had been going on for a very long time. The investigation intensified. Law enforcement dug into his background. What they uncovered surprised everyone. Darren had once worked for a cash logistics company, years earlier, until he was fired. Nobody knew the exact reason. Records suggested misconduct, possibly theft, possibly something else. Information was limited, but investigators believed he became obsessed afterward. Obsessed with the industry, obsessed with the crews, obsessed with the routes, obsessed with the life he'd lost. Over the following months, more evidence surfaced. Photographs, notes, maps, dozens of them, hidden inside storage units he rented under different names. Thousands of pictures of armored vehicles, employees, buildings, schedules, some images dated back nearly a decade. Thankfully, there was no evidence that he intended violence, at least none that police could prove. But that didn't make any of it less disturbing. The sheer amount of surveillance was horrifying. He'd spent years watching strangers who didn't even know he existed. Eventually, they located him. He was living alone in a remote cabin several hours away. Police arrested him on charges related to stalking and surveillance violations connected to the investigation. The details became messy after that. Court hearings, evaluations, legal proceedings. I don't know what happened in the end. I honestly stopped following the story. I just wanted it over. For months afterward, I kept expecting to see that truck again. Every parking lot, every late night shift, every empty road. I'd glance over my shoulder, waiting. Sometimes I'd even think I saw him. A dark truck parked too long, a silhouette across the street, a person standing where they shouldn't be. My brain had become trained to look for him. The weird thing about fear is how long it stays with you. Nothing dramatic ever happened. He never attacked anyone, never threatened anyone, never even spoke to me. But somehow that made it worse. Because I never learned what he was thinking, never learned why he chose us, never learned what he wanted. Maybe he didn't know either. Maybe he simply became obsessed. Maybe he spent so many years watching that he forgot how to participate in normal life. I left that job about 2 years later. Not because of Darren. I just wanted a different schedule. A normal life. Something that didn't involve empty parking lots at 4 in the morning. Every now and then, though, I'll be driving home late at night and notice a vehicle sitting alone in the distance. The driver isn't doing anything. They're just parked there, watching. And for a split second, I always think about Darren. I think about that truck. I think about those empty eyes staring through the glass. And I wonder how many strange people pass through our lives unnoticed. How many people watch from the shadows without ever speaking? How many obsessions exist around us that we'll never understand? Because the truth is, Darren wasn't a monster. At least not in the way horror movies usually portray monsters. He never chased me, never broke into my house, never attacked anyone. He was just a deeply disturbed man who spent years silently watching. And somehow that's what still bothers me the most. The idea that someone could stand 20 feet away from you, night after night, month after month, studying your life while remaining almost completely invisible. That's a kind of fear that doesn't disappear easily. Even now, years later, when I stop for gas in the middle of the night, I still scan the parking lot before getting out of my car, just in case. Next story. The summer after I graduated college, I took a job that sounded a lot better on paper than it actually was. The position was listed as Property Inspection Specialist. What that really meant was driving all over the county, taking photos of houses for insurance companies. If a home was being insured, sold, refinanced, or had some kind of dispute attached to it, someone needed updated photographs. That someone was usually me. Most of the time, it was incredibly boring. Drive to an address. Take pictures of the exterior. Document obvious damage. Leave. The homeowners usually weren't even present. In fact, most preferred not to be. The less interaction, the better. I listened to podcasts, drove hundreds of miles a week, and collected a paycheck. For nearly a year, nothing memorable happened. Then I got assigned a property outside a small town I'd never heard of before. And it became the only job I ever seriously considered quitting over. It started on a Monday morning. I arrived at the office around 8 o'clock. My supervisor handed me a stack of assignments. Most were routine. One address immediately stood out. The property was located nearly 2 hours away. That wasn't unusual. The note attached to it was, owner unresponsive, multiple missed inspections, urgent documentation required. There was also a handwritten message. Take photos only. Do not attempt contact. I remember laughing. That seemed oddly dramatic for an insurance inspection. Still, weird notes weren't uncommon. Some homeowners hated inspectors. Some threatened lawsuits. Some simply refused to answer the door. I tossed the paperwork into my bag and started driving. The farther I traveled, the more isolated everything became. The suburbs disappeared, and the small towns. Eventually, there were more trees than buildings. The roads narrowed. Cell service became inconsistent. By the time I reached the area, it was nearly noon. The property sat at the end of a long gravel road surrounded by dense woods. The house itself looked normal enough. Large, older, white siding, 2 stories, nothing particularly memorable. What immediately caught my attention was how empty everything felt. No vehículos, no movement, no signs of life. The place almost looked abandoned. I parked near the road and grabbed my camera. The assignment was simple. Take photos. Leave. 5 minutes. Maybe 10. As I walked toward the front of the property, I noticed something strange. Every curtain in the house was closed. Not partially closed. Completely sealed. Every single window. Even in broad daylight. I found it odd, but not alarming. Some people valued privacy. I began taking photographs. Front exterior. Roof line. Garage. Side yard. Normal stuff. While I worked, an uncomfortable feeling started creeping into my mind. The sensation that someone was watching me. At first, I ignored it. Working alone creates weird paranoia. You become hyper-aware of everything. Every sound, every movement, every shadow. I finished photographing the front and moved toward the backyard. The moment I rounded the corner, I stopped. A chair sat directly beneath one of the rear windows. Facing outward, not unusual, except for the deep grooves worn into the grass around it. The chair had clearly sat there for a very long time, as though someone spent hours every day staring out that window, watching. Again, not exactly suspicious, just strange. I took a few more pictures, then headed back toward my car. Before I reached it, I glanced back one final time. One of the curtains had moved. Not much, just enough. A narrow gap. Someone was standing behind it. Watching me leave, I couldn't make out a face, only a silhouette. The curtains slowly closed again. I got into my car and drove away. The entire encounter lasted maybe 15 seconds. Still, it bothered me. Most people hid when inspectors arrived. This felt different, intentional, like whoever lived there wanted me to know they were watching. Back at the office, I submitted the photographs and forgot about it. Or at least I tried to. 3 days later, the same property appeared in my assignment stack. I frowned. Didn't I already do this one? My supervisor nodded. The insurance company says the images weren't sufficient. What does that mean? No idea. They need additional documentation. I looked at the address. Same property, same owner, same weird notes. This time another message was attached. Do not enter property structures. Again, oddly specific. I considered asking more questions. Instead, I grabbed the file and left. The second visit felt different from the beginning. I knew what to expect, or at least I thought I did. The drive seemed longer. The road seemed quieter. Even the woods felt oppressive somehow. When I arrived, my stomach immediately tightened. A vehicle sat in the driveway. An old dark SUV. The first vehicle I'd seen there. I remained in my car for several moments, trying to decide whether to continue. Eventually work one. I grabbed my camera and got out. The property appeared silent. No movement. No visible occupants. I started photographing the side of the house. About 10 minutes into the inspection, I heard something. A knock. 3 sharp knocks, coming from inside the house. I froze. Then silence. A few seconds later, 3 more knocks. The sound echoed through the walls. It wasn't someone knocking on a door. It sounded like someone knocking from inside, as though they were trapped. The thought instantly felt ridiculous. Still, I couldn't shake it. 3 more knocks followed. Slow, deliberate. I backed away from the house. My pulse was rising now. Every instinct told me to leave. Then movement caught my eye. An upstairs curtain shifted. A face appeared briefly, just for a second, then vanished. I couldn't tell whether it was a man or a woman, young or old. All I knew was someone was definitely inside, watching. The knocking stopped. I finished the remaining photographs as quickly as possible and left. This time I filed a report. Nothing dramatic, just observations. Occupied residence, unknown occupant, repeated knocking sounds, visible person inside. I expected that to be the end of it. Instead, things became much worse. The following week, I received a phone call. Not from my supervisor. Not from the insurance company. From the homeowner. At least that's what he claimed. I answered while driving. A man's voice greeted me. Calm, soft-spoken, almost friendly. You're the inspector. It wasn't a question. Yes. You've been taking pictures of my house. Insurance inspection. A pause followed. Then he laughed. Not loudly. Just enough to make me uncomfortable. I know. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Okay. Another pause. Then, you shouldn't come back. The tone wasn't threatening. If anything, it sounded concerned. Like a warning. I didn't know how to respond. The man continued. People who stay interested in that house tend to regret it. Then the call disconnected. I immediately contacted my supervisor. He looked annoyed rather than concerned. Apparently, the homeowner had a long history of bizarre complaints and behavior. Nothing criminal, just odd. The insurance company still wanted documentation. The assignment remained active. A week later, I was sent back. Third visit. By then, I genuinely hated the property. Every part of it felt wrong. The woods, the silence, the curtains, the calls, everything. When I arrived, something had changed. The chair beneath the rear window was gone. In its place stood a ladder. A tall aluminum ladder reaching up toward the second floor. I stared at it. No vehicle, no workers, no visible reason for it to be there. The ladder simply leaned against the house. Waiting, I took photos, documented everything, prepared to leave. Then I noticed fresh footprints. They led from the woods, not from the driveway, not from the road. The woods. The tracks disappeared behind the house. My stomach sank. For reasons I couldn't explain, I suddenly felt extremely vulnerable standing there alone. I hurried back toward my car. Halfway there, I heard a voice. Excuse me. I nearly jumped out of my skin. An elderly woman stood near the road. I had no idea where she came from. One second nobody was there. The next she looked nervous, almost frightened. You work for them? The insurance company? I nodded. She glanced toward the house, then lowered her voice. You should stop coming here. The exact same morning. Again. Why? She hesitated, then shook her head. I don't want problems. What kind of problems? She immediately started walking away. Within seconds, she disappeared down the road, leaving me standing there alone. That encounter bothered me more than anything else, because unlike the homeowner, she seemed genuinely scared. Over the next month, I visited several dozen other properties. Life returned to normal. Then the phone calls started. At first they were harmless. Unknown number. No voice made. No messages. Just repeated calls. Several per week. Eventually, several per day. Whenever I answered, nobody spoke. Only breathing. Slow breathing. The kind that makes your skin crawl. I changed my number. The calls stopped. For a while. Then, one Friday afternoon, I received another assignment. The same property. Again, I couldn't believe it. Seriously? My supervisor looked equally frustrated. The insurance company won't close the file. Why? No idea. At this point, even he seemed tired of hearing about the place. I almost refused. Almost. But I needed the job. So I drove out there one final time. At least I hoped it would be the final time. The weather was awful. Dark clouds. Heavy rain. The road was muddy and nearly empty. Everything felt wrong from the moment I arrived. The SUV was back, parked in the driveway. This time I saw someone sitting inside, watching me. I remained in my vehicle. Neither of us moved. Nearly a minute passed. Then the person stepped out. A man, late 50s maybe. Thin, pale. He walked slowly toward me. I debated leaving. Instead, I cracked the window slightly. The man smiled, not warmly, just enough to seem unsettling. You're persistent. I immediately recognized the voice. The homeowner, the caller. The man laughed softly. You should have listened. Listened to what? His smile faded. Then he looked toward the woods. Not at me. The woods. As though something there concerned him. When he spoke again, his voice sounded different. Almost anxious. You think this is my house? I frowned. What? He pointed toward the trees. It's theirs. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Rain drummed against the roof. The man continued staring into the forest. Then suddenly his expression changed. Pure panic. Real panic. The kind you can't fake. Leave. The word came out sharply. Urgently. Now. I looked where he was staring. At first I saw nothing, then movement, deep between the trees. A figure, standing motionless, watching us. The distance made details impossible to identify, but someone was there. I turned back toward the homeowner. He looked terrified, not nervous. Terrified. Go. I didn't argue. I drove away. Fast. The entire trip home felt surreal. The figure, the woods, the fear in the homeowner's face. Nothing made sense. I expected another assignment eventually. Instead, the property disappeared. Months passed. No inspections. No phone calls. Nothing. I assumed the insurance company finally closed the file. Then one morning, my supervisor called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable. Remember that property? Immediately, my stomach dropped. What about it? He slid a newspaper across the desk. The headline wasn't dramatic, just local news. Authorities investigating remote property. The article explained that police discovered multiple people living in structures hidden deep within the surrounding woods. Makeshift shelters, storage areas, underground rooms. Nobody knew how long they'd been there. Some estimates suggested years. The residents avoided contact with outsiders and disappeared before authorities arrived. No arrests were made. The property owner was missing. So was the SUV. So was everyone connected to the investigation. To this day, I don't know exactly what happened. Maybe it was nothing more than squatters. Maybe some isolated community living off-grid. Maybe something stranger. What bothers me isn't what I know. It's what I don't know. The homeowner's fear seemed real. The warnings seemed real. The woman by the road seemed genuinely terrified. And that figure in the woods, I've never forgotten it. Sometimes when people hear scary stories, they expect some huge reveal. A murderer, a monster, a supernatural twist. Life usually isn't that neat. Sometimes the most disturbing experiences are the ones without answers. The ones that leave gaps your imagination spends years trying to fill. I eventually left property inspections. Not because of that house specifically, but because I grew tired of spending every day alone on unfamiliar roads. Still, every now and then, I'll pass a house surrounded by woods and remember that place. I'll remember the curtains, the knocking, the phone calls, the warnings, and most of all, I'll remember the look on that homeowner's face. Because whatever he saw in those woods that day, it scared him far more than it scared me. And that's the part that still keeps me wondering what was really out there. I never thought much about the crawl space under my house until the night I heard someone cough beneath my bedroom floor. It wasn't a loud cough. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of cough you'd barely notice in a grocery store or sitting in traffic. But when you're alone in your house at nearly midnight and the sound comes from directly beneath your feet, it's impossible to ignore. At first, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. I was 30 years old at the time and living alone in a small rental house on the outskirts of town. The place wasn't fancy, but it was affordable, close to work, and significantly better than the apartment I'd been renting before. The house itself was old. Not charming old, just old. The floors creaked. The windows rattled during storms. The plumbing occasionally made strange noises. It was the kind of house where random sounds happened often enough that you stopped questioning them. Which is exactly why I ignored the cough. At least initially. I was sitting in bed watching videos on my laptop when I heard it. A single dry cough. Then silence. I paused the video. Listened. Nothing. After about 30 seconds, I shook my head and went back to what I was doing. The next morning, I forgot about it completely. Life was busy. I worked as an insurance adjuster and spent most of my days driving between appointments. By the time I got home, every evening, I was exhausted. The house was basically a place to eat, sleep, and repeat the process. A few days passed. Then another strange thing happened. I came home from work and immediately noticed my kitchen trash can have been moved. Not far, maybe 3 feet, just enough that it looked wrong. At first I assumed I'd moved it myself, but the more I thought about it, the less certain I became. I was a creature of habit. Everything in my house stayed where I left it. I shrugged it off. It happened again. This time, it was one of my dining room chairs. It had been pulled slightly away from the table. Not enough to be obvious. just enough to make me pause. Again, I tried to explain it away. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was forgetting things. Maybe I moved it without realizing. The problem was that these little incidents kept happening. A cabinet door left open. A lamp turned slightly. A bathroom drawer not fully closed. Every occurrence was minor, individually meaningless. Together, they created an uncomfortable feeling that I couldn't shake. I began taking photos before leaving for work. Nothing elaborate, just quick snapshots of certain rooms. Then I'd compare them when I got home. For nearly 2 weeks, everything looked normal. I started feeling ridiculous. Then one Thursday evening, I came home and noticed the pantry door standing open. My stomach tightened immediately because I had a photo, and in the photo, it was definitely closed. I checked every room. Nothing appeared stolen. Nothing seemed damaged. Still, I couldn't explain it. The logical part of my brain suggested a simple possibility. Maybe someone had entered the house. The irrational part hated that explanation, because if someone had entered the house, that would have raised much worse questions. Who and why? I checked every door, every window. Everything appeared secure. No signs of forced entry. No evidence anyone had been inside. Eventually, I convinced myself there had to be another explanation. Maybe the door hadn't latched properly. Maybe it drifted open. Not impossible, just unlikely. The following week, I started sleeping poorly. Every small noise woke me. Every creak sounded suspicious. Every shadow seemed wrong. I hated it. I've always considered myself a rational person. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't jump to conclusions. But there's something unsettling about feeling like your home isn't entirely yours anymore. One Friday night, I woke up around 3 in the morning needing water. As I walked through the hallway, I froze. The attic access hatch was open. It hung down from the ceiling above the hallway. I stared at it for several seconds. I never used the attic. In fact, I'd never even opened the hatch since moving in. Slowly, I approached. The ladder wasn't extended, just the hatch hanging slightly open. I grabbed a broom and pushed it closed. Then I went back to bed. The next morning, I called my landlord. He insisted nobody had entered the property. When I mentioned the attic hatch, he sounded confused. According to him, there wasn't anything up there worth accessing. Old insulation, some wiring, nothing else. Still, he agreed to stop by. That afternoon, he inspected the attic. Nothing unusual. No signs of animals. No signs of damage. No explanation. I felt embarrassed for even bringing it up. For a few weeks afterward, things improved. No moved furniture. No open doors. No strange sounds. The feeling gradually faded. Then came the grocery receipt. I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's the moment everything changed. I had stopped at a grocery store after work, bought a few items, cooked dinner, went to bed. The next morning, while making coffee, I noticed the receipt sitting on the counter. The problem was that I distinctly remembered throwing it away. Again, not a huge deal. Except that when I picked it up, there was handwriting on the back. 3 words. You missed one. I remember staring at those words for a long time, trying to process them, trying to convince myself there had to be an explanation. A prank, a misunderstanding, something, but there wasn't. I lived alone. Nobody had access to the house. At least nobody should have. I called the police. The responding officer was polite, but understandably skeptical. No theft, no damage, no weaknesses. Just a receipt with writing on it. They took a report. That was it. After they left, I bought security cameras. 4 of them. Front door, back door, living room, hallway. If someone were entering my house, I'd catch them. At least that was the plan. The first few nights revealed nothing. The cameras recorded exactly what you'd expect. An empty house, a sleeping homeowner, silence. Then, on the 5th night, I woke up to a notification. Motion detected. Elui camera. My pulse immediately spiked. I opened the app. The clip showed an empty hallway. No movement. No person. Nothing. Yet the motion alert had triggered. I reviewed the footage repeatedly. Then I noticed something. The attic hatch. It moved. Barely. Just enough to shift. Then stop. I watched the clip 5 more times. Same thing. A slight movement. No explanation. The next day, I borrowed a ladder from a neighbor. For the first time since moving in, I climbed into the attic myself. The space was larger than I expected. Dusty, dark, filled with insulation. I used my phone flashlight and slowly looked around. At first, everything seemed normal. Then I found a water bottle. Not old, not dusty, recent. My stomach dropped. A few feet away sat another one. Then a food wrapper. Then another. Someone had been up there. Recently. I climbed down immediately and called the police again. This time they took things much more seriously. Officers searched the attic thoroughly. What they found terrified me. There was a section near the far end where insulation had been pushed aside. Beneath it sat a small collection of items. Food, bottled water, blankets, flashlights. Someone had created a hidden sleeping area. Inside my attic, the police searched the rest of the house. Eventually, one officer discovered something I hadn't known existed. A narrow access panel inside a bedroom closet. The panel connected directly to the attic. Someone could move between the two without using the hallway hatch. The realization made me feel sick. A stranger had likely been inside my home repeatedly. Maybe for weeks, maybe longer. But things became even worse. The hidden area contained personal items. Not mine. Whoever had been staying there left behind notebooks. Several notebooks. The officers examined them. Most pages contained random observations. Dates. Times. Notes. Eventually they found entries about me. My work schedule. What time I left. What time I came home. What groceries I bought. What television shows I watched. How long I stayed awake. It was obvious. Someone had been watching me. Closely. For a long time. I spent that night at a friend's apartment. I barely slept. The next day, police returned with more information. Apparently, a former tenant's adult son had been staying in the attic. The house previously belonged to his mother before she moved away. The son had developed severe mental health issues. After his mother relocated, he apparently continued returning to the property. At some point, he began living inside the attic. The investigators believed he'd been there for months before I even moved in. He simply adapted whenever new tenants arrived. Listening, watching, remaining hidden. Police launched a search. For several days, they couldn't find him. That terrified me more than anything, because it meant he was still out there, still aware that I'd discovered him, still potentially nearby. A week later, I returned home. Against my better judgment, the police assured me extra patrols were occurring. The locks had been changed. The attic access points secured. Logically, I knew the risk was lower. Emotionally, I felt miserable. Everything reminded me of him. Every room, every hallway, every sound. I couldn't stop imagining someone watching. Then, on the 10th night after the discovery, I woke to the sound of scratching. Not above me. Outside, near my bedroom window. I sat upright immediately. The scratching continued. Slow, deliberate, back and forth. I grabbed my phone and looked outside. Nothing. Just darkness. The scratching stopped. Then came 3 knocks, directly on the glass. I nearly dropped the phone. 3 slow knocks. Then silence. I called 911 immediately. While speaking to dispatch, I looked outside again. A figure stood near the tree line at the edge of my yard, watching the house, watching my window, watching me. The police arrived quickly. By the time they searched the property, the figure was gone. But footprints remained. Fresh footprints, leading from the yard toward the woods. The search continued overnight. Just before sunrise, officers found him, less than half a mile away, hiding inside an abandoned shed. The same man from the attic. The notebooks found in the shed contained even more entries, more observations, more schedules, more details about my life. The final entry chilled me more than anything else. It was dated the night before his arrest. It read, "He knows now. Just that. Nothing else." The man was ultimately charged with multiple offenses. The legal process took months. I moved out long before it concluded. So people have asked why. After all, the danger was gone. The man was caught. The house was secure. Everything should have returned to normal. But that's not how it works. Because once you've learned someone secretly lived above your ceiling while you slept, once you've discovered notebooks documenting your daily life, once you've realized every strange feeling was actually justified, you never really look at that house the same way again. Even now, Years later, I still check attics whenever I move somewhere new. I still inspect crawl spaces. I still pay attention to sounds most people ignore. And every once in a while, usually late at night, I'll hear a house creak, a floorboard settle, a pipe shift, something completely normal. Yet for a brief moment, my mind always returns to that old rental house. And the night, I heard someone cough beneath my bedroom floor, because that tiny sound turned out to be the first warning that I wasn't actually living alone. Next story. I used to think people exaggerated when they said a single bad decision could change your life. Not ruin it, not destroy it, just change it. One choice, one moment where you ignore that little voice in the back of your head. The voice telling you something feels wrong. For me, that decision happened because I was desperate for money. A few years ago, I was 24 and living alone in a city where rent seemed to increase every 6 months. I worked full-time at a warehouse loading trucks. The job wasn't terrible, but it wasn't exactly paying enough for me to get ahead either. Most months ended with me barely scraping by. Every paycheck was already spent before it arrived. So when my car unexpectedly broke down and the repair estimate came back at nearly $2,000, I panicked. I didn't have savings. I didn't have family nearby, and I couldn't afford to miss work. For several nights, I sat in my apartment searching for side jobs online. Anything that could bring in extra money quickly. Food delivery, odd jobs, moving help, freelance work. Nothing seemed worthwhile. Then I found an advertisement. It sounded ridiculously easy. A local moving company needed temporary overnight workers to assist with clearing out a commercial property. The pay was excellent, much higher than similar jobs. The shift was only one night. Cash payment. No experience necessary. Looking back, every red flag was already there. But when you're stressed and desperate, red flags start looking a lot like opportunities. I submitted my information. The next afternoon, I got a call. The man introduced himself as Eric. He spoke casually, friendly, normal. He explained that a business owner had purchased an old property and needed everything removed before renovations could begin. Furniture, boxes, storage items, basic labor. The shift would start at 8 that evening. I agreed immediately. By 7:30 that night, I was driving toward the address he'd provided. The property sat about 40 minutes outside the city. The farther I drove, the more isolated everything became. Street lights disappeared. Businesses vanished. Eventually, the road narrowed into a winding two-lane highway surrounded by woods. I remember checking my GPS several times because it felt like I was heading somewhere people weren't supposed to go. Then I saw the property. It wasn't an office building. It wasn't a warehouse. It was an old motel. A very old motel. The kind you see abandoned beside highways after new roads divert traffic elsewhere. Half the signs were missing. Several windows were boarded up. The parking lot was cracked and overgrown. At first I thought I had the wrong address. Then I noticed 3 pickup trucks parked near the main office. A handful of people stood nearby talking. I parked and walked over. Eric introduced himself immediately. Mid-40s, heavy set, friendly smile. Exactly the kind of person who puts you at ease quickly. There were 5 other workers. Most appeared to be around my age. A few looked older. Nobody seemed concerned. That made me feel better. If everyone else was comfortable, maybe I was overthinking things. Eric gathered us together and explained the plan. The motel had been closed for years. Everything inside needed to be removed. Furniture, appliances, boxes, anything left behind. The owner wanted it emptied before demolition crews arrived. Simple enough. We split into teams and started working. For the first hour, everything felt normal. Dusty, dirty, exhausting, but normal. Most rooms were empty. A few contained old furniture. Some still had abandoned belongings scattered around. Nothing unusual. Then I entered room 18. The second I opened the door, I noticed something strange. Unlike the other rooms, this one looked occupied. Not recently occupied. Currently occupied. There were blankets on the bed, food containers, several empty water bottles, a flashlight, even a portable radio. I immediately assumed a homeless person had been staying there. I called Eric over. He glanced inside and shrugged. Probably someone passing through. That answer bothered me. If someone was living there, shouldn't we call somebody? Check if they were still around? Personal belongings. Yet nobody seemed interested in discussing it. Every time someone mentioned it, Eric brushed it off. The explanation never changed. People passing through. Nothing to worry about. By midnight, most of the motel was cleared. We took a short break outside. That's when I noticed something odd. One of the workers was gone. A guy named Travis. I hadn't spoken to him much, but he'd been there earlier. Now he wasn't. I asked Eric where he'd gone. He said Travis left early. Didn't feel well. The answer seemed reasonable. Still, something felt off. Mainly because nobody remembered seeing him leave. Not his vehicle. Not him saying goodbye. Nothing. Again, I ignored the feeling. The shift continued. Around 1:30 in the morning, Eric assigned me and another worker named Kyle to clear storage areas behind the motel. The storage building sat near the tree line, separated from a main property by about 100 yards. As we approached, Kyle made a joke. Something about horror movies always starting this way. I laughed, but honestly, I felt uneasy. The building looked ancient. The windows were covered. The door barely hung on its hinges. Inside, the air smelled awful. Not rotten, not exactly, just stale, like a place that hadn't been opened in years. We began moving boxes. Most were empty. Some contained old paperwork. Others held random junk. Then Kyle found a locked door. Unlike everything else in the building, this door looked newer. Much newer. A heavy padlock secured it. We called Eric over. The moment he saw the door, his expression changed. Only briefly, but I noticed it. For the first time all night, he looked nervous. Then he forced a smile. Nothing important. Kyle asked what was inside. Eric didn't answer directly. Instead, he told us to ignore it and continue working elsewhere. That response immediately raised everyone's curiosity. People started asking questions. Eric became noticeably irritated. Eventually, he pulled out bolt cutters. Without another word, he cut the lock. Then he opened the door. Inside was a staircase leading underground. The temperature seemed to drop instantly. The smell became stronger too. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally, Eric laughed awkwardly. Old storm shelter. The explanation sounded rehearsed, like he'd prepared ahead of time. He descended first. The rest of us followed. I wish I'd stayed outside. The underground space wasn't a shelter. At least not originally. It looked more like a series of storage rooms. Concrete walls, narrow hallways, several locked doors. Dust covered everything. Yet despite the dust, certain areas showed signs of recent movement. Footprints, scuff marks, fresh trash. Someone had been down there. Recently, everyone noticed. Nobody said it out loud, but we all noticed. The deeper we went, the stranger things became. One room contained old mattresses. Another contained dozens of empty food containers. Another held piles of clothing. Not old clothing, modern clothing, recent clothing. The realization spread through the group simultaneously. People had been living down there. Not years ago. Now, I remember Kyle quietly asking the question everyone was thinking. Where are they? Nobody answered. Even Eric remained silent. Then we heard a door slam. Far away, somewhere deeper underground. The sound echoed through the corridors. Every person froze. The silence afterward felt endless. Another slam followed. Closer this time. Then footsteps. Running footsteps. A lot of them. Coming toward us. Panic erupted immediately. Nobody stopped to investigate. Nobody tried to be brave. We ran. Everyone ran. I remember hearing shouting. Next story. I used to deliver medical supplies to clinics and nursing homes across 3 counties. It wasn't a glamorous job. Most days consisted of driving for hours, unloading boxes, collecting signatures, and moving on to the next stop. The routes rarely changed. The people rarely changed. Even the conversations rarely changed. After doing the job for nearly 4 years, I could practically drive some of those routes with my eyes closed. That's probably why what happened stands out so much. Most strange experiences happen because you're somewhere unfamiliar, a place you've never been, a situation you've never encountered. This happened on a route I'd driven hundreds of times, a route I knew better than my own neighborhood. It started on a Wednesday in late October. The weather was miserable. Cold rain, heavy clouds, the kind of day where everything feels darker than it should. My shift started around 6 in the morning. I loaded my truck and headed out. The day was completely normal until my second to last stop, a small assisted living facility located nearly an hour outside town. The facility sat at the end of a winding county road surrounded by dense woods. I'd delivered there dozens of times before. The staff knew me by name. The residents often waved when I came through. Nothing about the place had ever seemed unusual. That afternoon, I arrived around 4. The rain had gotten worse. Visibility was terrible. I parked near the service entrance and unloaded several boxes onto a cart. As I rolled everything inside, one of the nurses greeted me. She seemed distracted, stressed, more stressed than usual. I asked if everything was okay. She forced a smile, then said something strange. "Have you seen anyone parked outside?" The question caught me off guard. I told her no, just the usual vehicles. The nurse nodded slowly, almost like she'd expected that answer. Then she thanked me and walked away. At the time, I didn't think much of it. People ask random questions, especially in healthcare settings. I finished the delivery and headed back toward the truck. As I reached the parking lot, I noticed a dark SUV parked near the edge of the property. The vehicle hadn't been there when I arrived. At least I didn't think it had. It sat beneath several trees overlooking the building. Engine off, lights off, no visible movement. Something about it felt strange. Not threatening, just strange. I stood there for a moment, then climbed in my truck and left. That should have been the end of it. But the next day, the SUV was there again. Same location, same position. Again, no movement. Again, no visible occupants. This time I mentioned it to another employee. She immediately knew which vehicle I meant. That surprised me. Apparently staff had noticed it too. Nobody knew who it belonged to. Nobody had seen anyone enter or exit. The vehicle simply appeared every afternoon, then disappeared overnight. The staff assumed it belonged to a visitor. Eventually everyone stopped paying attention. Honestly, so did I, for about a week. Then one Friday afternoon, I arrived earlier than usual. Around 2 o'clock, the SUV wasn't there. I completed my delivery, talked with several employees, loaded empty containers into my truck. Everything felt normal. Then while leaving, I glanced into my side mirror. The SUV was pulling into the property. I immediately checked the clock. 2:47 p.m. The timing felt oddly precise, almost deliberate. The vehicle passed me slowly. Dark windows, older model, no visible license plate on the front. I couldn't see the driver. As it reached the far end of the lot, it parked in its usual spot beneath the trees. Again, no one exited. Again, no movement. I remember feeling curious more than concerned. At that point, it was simply becoming a mystery. One of those little oddities people notice but never solve. The following week, things escalated. I arrived on Tuesday and immediately noticed several police vehicles outside the facility. That usually isn't a good sign. When I went inside, staff members seemed shaken. One of the residents had gone missing. An elderly man suffering from dementia. Apparently, he disappeared sometime during the night. Search teams had been looking for hours. The news bothered me, mainly because of the weather. It had been cold, very cold, and the surrounding woods stretched for miles. The chances of a confused elderly man surviving long outside weren't great. I finished my delivery quickly and left. As I drove away, I looked toward the tree line. The SUV was there, watching the facility, exactly where it always sat. For the first time, the vehicle genuinely unsettled me. Not because I believed it was connected. There was no reason to think that. The timing just felt wrong. That night, search teams found a resident. Thankfully alive. Cold, disoriented, but alive. The situation should have ended there. Instead, another resident disappeared 2 weeks later. Then another. Unlike the first man, these residents weren't found wandering nearby. They simply vanished. No witnesses, no explanations, no clues. The facility tightened security immediately. Police became heavily involved. Families demanded answers. Staff became increasingly nervous. And through all of it, The SUV kept appearing. Every single afternoon. Always the same spot. Always overlooking the building. By now, everyone knew about it. Staff, police, visitors, everyone. Several officers even approached the vehicle on different occasions. Each time it was gone before they arrived. Almost like the driver somehow knew they were coming. Rumors spread quickly. Some people believed it belonged to a family member. Others thought it was a journalist, a private investigator, a disgruntled former employee. Nobody knew. Then one afternoon, I finally saw the driver. Or at least I got a glimpse. I was unloading supplies when the SUV unexpectedly started moving. The driver's window lowered briefly. Only a few inches. Just enough for me to see part of the face. Male, middle-aged, pale. That's all I really noticed. The window immediately rolled back up. Then the vehicle drove away. I expected relief. Instead, I felt worse. Because seeing him made the entire situation feel real. No longer just a mysterious vehicle. Now there was an actual person involved. A person repeatedly showing up for reasons nobody understood. A month later, I received a route change. Several clinics were added to my schedule. One of them happened to sit about 20 miles from the assisted living facility. The first time I delivered there, something immediately caught my attention. The same SUV sat across the street. At first I assumed it was a coincidence. Then I noticed where it was parked, directly facing the building, watching. The exact same behavior. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The chances of that being random felt incredibly small. When I mentioned it to the clinic manager, her expression changed immediately. She knew the vehicle too. Apparently staff there had noticed it repeatedly over the previous month. That conversation gave me chills, because suddenly the pattern expanded beyond one location. The driver wasn't watching a single facility. He was watching multiple facilities. Why? Nobody knew. A few days later, everything finally came together, or at least partially. I arrived at the assisted living facility around 3 in the afternoon. Police vehicles crowded the parking lot, far more than usual. Something serious had happened. Inside, employees looked terrified. One of the nurses recognized me immediately. Then she told me the news. Someone had attempted to abduct a resident. Broad daylight. The resident had been walking with a caregiver when a man approached and tried convincing them to leave with him. The caregiver intervened immediately. The suspect fled before police arrived. The description matched the driver. Middle-aged, pale, dark clothing. The SUV was gone. Police launched a major search. For several days, the story dominated local news. Tips flooded in. Most went nowhere. Then a break finally came. A gas station employee recognized the vehicle. Security footage confirmed it. The SUV had been spotted nearly 40 miles away. Investigators tracked fuel purchases, surveillance footage, traffic cameras. Eventually, they located a property connected to the suspect. What they found there was deeply disturbing. The man lived alone, at least officially, but investigators discovered extensive records. Photographs, schedules, maps, notes, most focused on healthcare facilities, assisted living centers, clinics, rehabilitation facilities. The man had apparently spent years obsessively documenting locations throughout the region. Police never publicly disclosed all the details, but enough information emerged to paint a frightening picture. He wasn't randomly watching those buildings. He was studying them, learning routines, learning schedules, learning vulnerabilities. The exact motive remained unclear. Some reports suggested mental illness. Others suggested something far more sinister. Either way, authorities believed multiple disappearances may have been connected. The investigation stretched on for months, then years. Even now, certain details remain unresolved. But here's the part that bothers me most. A detective later told me something during an interview, something I still think about. The suspect maintained detailed logs, pages and pages documenting observations, dates, times, vehicle descriptions, employee schedules, visitor patterns. One section focused specifically on delivery drivers, including me. Apparently, my truck appeared throughout several notebooks, not because I was important, simply because I was predictable. Same route, same times, same locations, week after week. The realization unsettled me. For months, maybe years, this man had watched me without my knowledge. Not directly, not obsessively, just as another piece of information, another predictable part of his environment. I often wonder how many times I unknowingly passed him, how many times he watched from parking lot, a roadside shoulder, a gas station, how many times I saw the SUV without realizing it. The truth is, most people imagine danger as something obvious. A masked intruder, a threatening stranger, a dramatic confrontation. Real life often isn't like that. Sometimes danger sits quietly in a parking lot, watching, waiting, blending into the background. So ordinary that people stop noticing it. That's what happened with the SUV. Everyone saw it. Employees saw it. Visitors saw it. Residents saw it. Police saw it. Eventually, it became part of the scenery. Just another vehicle parked beneath the trees. Until one day it wasn't. Until one day people finally learned there was a reason it kept coming back. And by then, it had already been there for a very long time. Whenever I drive through rural areas now, I occasionally notice vehicles parked along roadsides. Most are harmless. Probably someone checking directions, making a phone call, eating lunch, living completely normal lives. But every now and then I'll see one sitting somewhere just a little too long, watching something a little too carefully. And for a moment, I'll think about that dark SUV, the one everyone noticed, the one nobody understood, the one that sat quietly beneath the trees for months while people convinced themselves it was probably nothing. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't a person hiding from everyone. Sometimes it's the person standing in plain sight. The person everyone sees. The person nobody questions until it's far too late. Next story. I used to work overnight security at a self-storage facility on the edge of town. It wasn't the kind of job people imagine when they hear the word security. There were no dramatic confrontations, no high-speed chases, no action movie moments. Most nights consisted of sitting in a small office, watching camera feeds, making patrols every hour, and trying not to fall asleep. The facility itself was enormous. Hundreds of storage units stretched across several acres. Long rows of identical metal doors, chain link fencing, security lights, access gates. During the day, the place felt normal. At night, it felt completely different. The lights created long shadows between the rows. Every sound echoed. Every movement seemed bigger than it actually was. Even after working there for over a year, I never fully got used to the atmosphere. Still, it was a good job. Quiet, predictable, boring. And boring is usually a good thing when you work security. At least that's what I thought. The incident happened during the middle of winter. Business was slow. Most customers only visited during daytime hours because of the cold weather. Overnight traffic was almost non-existent. That particular night started normally. I arrived just before 10 p.m. The evening guard gave me the usual update. Nothing unusual. No maintenance issues. No customer complaints. No police activity. Everything looked routine. I settled into the office and started my shift. For the first few hours, absolutely nothing happened. Around midnight, I completed my first patrol, then another around 1, then another around 2. Everything seemed fine. The facility was completely empty, or at least it appeared to be. At approximately 2:30 a.m., I noticed something strange on one of the camera feeds. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow moving between 2 rows of storage units. I stared at the monitor for several seconds. Nothing. No movement. No person. No vehicle. Just empty rows. I eventually dismissed it and returned to my paperwork. About 15 minutes later, it happened again. This time on a different camera. A brief movement near the end of one aisle. Fast. Almost too fast to identify. Again, when I focused on the screen, nothing was there. The camera showed an empty corridor between storage units. I remember feeling annoyed more than concerned. Security cameras constantly produce weird visual glitches, especially older systems. I assumed that's what I was seeing. Still, I decided to conduct another patrol just to be safe. I grabbed my flashlight and headed outside. The cold hit immediately. The temperature had dropped well below freezing. My breath hung in the air. Everything was silent, completely silent. I walked the main access road first, then began checking the rows. Nothing appeared unusual. No vehículos, no damidlax, no open units, no signs of trespassing. After about 20 minutes, I returned to the office. Problem solved, or so I thought. Around 3:15 a.m., a gate alert appeared on my computer. The system indicated that someone had entered a valid access code at the front gate. That immediately caught my attention. Customer access officially ended at 10 p.m. Nobody should have been entering. I checked the gate camera. No vehicle, no person, nothing. The gate itself hadn't moved. The alert remained logged in the system, though. According to the records, a valid code had been entered successfully. I reviewed it twice, then 3 times. Same result. The code belonged to a customer named Michael. I recognized the name. He rented 2 large storage units near the back of the property. The man visited frequently, usually during normal business hours, never at 3 in the morning. I made a note of the incident and continued monitoring. 20 minutes later, another gate alert appeared. Same customer, same code. Again, no visible vehicle, no visible person. At this point, I was genuinely confused. I restarted the gate software, then checked the logs. Everything appeared normal. There was no obvious explanation. Shortly after 4 o'clock, I began another patrol. This time I headed directly toward Michael's storage units. The units sat near the farthest section of the facility, an area most customers rarely visited. As I approached, something immediately felt wrong. One of the units appeared slightly open, not wide open, just enough to create a narrow black gap, maybe 2 inches. I stopped walking. My flashlight remained fixed on the door. Storage unit doors don't simply slide open by themselves, especially not heavy commercial doors. I slowly approached. The lock was hanging from a latch. Unlocked. That wasn't necessarily suspicious. Customers sometimes forgot. Still, something felt off. I called out, "Hello." No response. I waited. Nothing. The facility remained silent. I stepped closer, then shined my flashlight through the opening. At first I couldn't see much. Just darkness. Boxes. Furniture. Normal storage items. Then my flashlight landed on something deeper inside. A chair, positioned directly toward the door. Someone was sitting in it. My entire body froze. For a second, I genuinely thought I was looking at a person. Then I realized it was a mannequin. A full-sized mannequin. The kind used in clothing stores. Its head tilted slightly sideways. Its blank face pointed directly at the opening. Directly at me. I nearly jumped out of my skin. After my heart stopped racing, I laughed nervously. It felt ridiculous. A mannequin wasn't exactly a threat. Still, seeing it unexpectedly in the middle of the night wasn't pleasant. I looked around the unit again. Everything appeared normal. Satisfied, I closed the door completely and returned to the office. The rest of the shift passed quietly. By sunrise, I'd almost forgotten about it. Then Michael showed up. He arrived around 8 a.m., shortly before my shift ended. I mentioned the unlocked unit. His reaction surprised me. The color drained from his face immediately. He asked which unit. I told him, without another word. He hurried toward the back of the facility. Something about his response bothered me, enough that I followed at a distance. When we reached the unit, Michael unlocked the door and stepped inside. Seconds later, I heard him curse. Then he emerged, looking visibly shaken. I asked what was wrong. He hesitated, then told me nothing was missing, at least not that he could tell. But the mannequin wasn't supposed to be there. That statement instantly made my stomach drop. I reminded him that I'd seen it sitting inside the unit. He stared at me, completely serious, then said he had never owned a mannequin. Not now, not ever. I assumed he was mistaken. Maybe he forgot. Maybe it belonged to a family member. Maybe he'd purchased it years ago. But he insisted. The mannequin wasn't his. The more we talked, the stranger things became. Michael rented 2 units. One contained furniture. The other contained business inventory. Neither contained anything remotely related to a mannequin. We searched both units thoroughly. Nothing else appeared disturbed. No signs of forced entry. No missing property. No explanation. Eventually, management reviewed security footage. That's where things became genuinely unsettling. The footage showed no one entering the facility. No vehículos. No trespassers. No activity near Michael's unit. Nothing. Yet somehow the mannequin appeared inside overnight. Management assumed it was some kind of recording issue. A camera malfunction. Human error. They weren't particularly interested in pursuing it. After all, nothing had been stolen. No crime had occurred. Life moved on for about 3 weeks. Then another customer reported something strange. A woman claimed someone had entered her unit. Again, nothing was missing. Instead, items had been rearranged. Boxes moved. Furniture repositioned. Photographs turned around. At first, management assumed she simply forgot how things were arranged. Then another customer reported something similar. Then another. None reported theft. Only movement, rearrangement, objects appearing where they shouldn't be. Objects disappearing and reappearing elsewhere. It sounded ridiculous, yet complaints kept coming. Security footage revealed nothing. Locks showed no signs of tampering. Access logs remained normal. Management blamed customer memory. Customers blamed management. The situation became increasingly frustrating. Then I experienced something myself. One night around 2 a.m., I completed a routine patrol. Everything appeared normal. I specifically remember checking Row J because several complaints originated there. Nothing unusual. An hour later, I returned. Every unit remained locked. Every aisle remained empty. Except for one thing. A folding chair sat in the middle of the road, directly between 2 rows. I stopped immediately. I knew the chair hadn't been there earlier. I was certain. The facility had dozens of similar chairs inside maintenance buildings. But none should have been outside, especially not positioned perfectly in the center of the road. I looked around. No movement, no people, no vehículos, just the chair. I carried it back to the office. The incident bothered me more than I wanted to admit, because unlike customer complaints, I knew exactly what I'd seen. The chair wasn't there. Then it was. No explanation. A week later, things escalated dramatically. Around 3:30 a.m., one of the motion alarms activated. Row J, the same area where I'd found the chair. I immediately switched cameras. Nothing. No visible movement. The alarm continued triggering. Over and over. I grabbed my flashlight and drove the facility golf cart toward the area. As I approached, I noticed something strange. Several storage unit doors stood partially open. Not wide open, just slightly, like someone had carefully lifted each one a few inches. I counted 6 units, all in a row, every single one partially open. That shouldn't have been possible. I parked and approached cautiously. The first unit appeared empty. The second contained boxes. The third contained furniture. Nothing unusual. Then I reached the fourth. My flashlight illuminated the interior, and I immediately backed away. The mannequin was there again. Not Michael's unit. A completely different unit. The same mannequin. Same tilted head. Same blank expression. Facing the door. Waiting. I knew it was the same one. There was a crack near the forehead. I remembered noticing it weeks earlier. The mannequin had somehow moved between locked storage units. My pulse skyrocketed. Someone was clearly entering units, moving objects, creating disturbances. But how and why? I immediately called police. Officers arrived quickly. Together we searched the facility. Eventually we discovered something management had completely overlooked. A vacant maintenance tunnel. Years earlier, utility lines had been installed beneath part of the property. Most employees didn't even know the tunnels existed. Access points remained hidden inside several maintenance structures. Someone had been using them. The tunnels connected beneath multiple rows, allowing movement throughout large portions of the facility without appearing on cameras. Investigators spent hours searching. Near sunrise, they finally found evidence. Food wrappers, sleeping bags, flashlights, personal belongings. Someone had been living down there, possibly for months, maybe longer. The discovery horrified everyone. Yet the creepiest part came later. Police eventually identified the individual, a former employee, someone who had worked at the facility years earlier. After losing his job, he apparently never left completely. He knew the property, knew the tunnels, knew camera blind spots, everything. Investigators believed he'd been secretly living beneath the facility while occasionally entering storage units. Not to steal, not primarily, anyway. He seemed obsessed with observing people's belongings, studying their lives, reading documents, looking through photographs, rearranging objects. The mannequin belonged to him. Police later found dozens of photographs featuring it, positioned inside various units, almost like some bizarre personal project. The former employee was eventually arrested several counties away after abandoning the tunnels. What disturbed me most wasn't what he did. It was how long he did it. For months, maybe years, customers stored pieces of their lives there. Family photos, personal records, memories, valuable possessions, all while a stranger secretly moved through the facility beneath them, watching, exploring, entering whenever he wanted. Most people imagine storage units as sealed spaces, private spaces, secure spaces. After all, that's the entire business model. You lock your belongings away and assume they'll stay untouched. But every time I drive past a storage facility now, I remember that mannequin, sitting silently inside that unit, facing the door, waiting in the darkness. And I remember the realization that someone had been moving through those rows long before anyone knew he was there. Not stealing, not vandalizing, just watching. Sometimes I think that's even worse, because at least theft has a purpose. At least vandalism has a motive. What unsettled me most was that this man seemed motivated entirely by curiosity. He wanted to see people's lives, to stand among their possessions, to know things he had no right knowing. And for a very long time, nobody realized he was there. Not the customers, not management, not security, not even me. Until the night I opened a storage unit and found a mannequin staring back at me from the darkness. Next story. I used to work the night shift at a 24-hour gas station just off the interstate. If you've ever worked overnight at a place like that, you already know the kind of people who come through after midnight. Most customers were completely normal. Truck drivers grabbing coffee, nurses getting off late shifts, people returning from road trips, the occasional college student buying snacks at 3 in the morning. But every now and then, someone would walk through those doors and immediately make you uncomfortable. Not because they were aggressive, not because they were loud, just because something felt wrong. Usually those people would buy a drink, leave, and I'd never see them again. This story is about someone who didn't leave, at least not when he should have. The gas station sat about 15 minutes outside a small town. The interstate ran directly behind the property. Across the road sat a closed diner that had gone out of business years earlier. Beyond that was nothing but fields and woods. During the day, the station stayed busy. At night, it felt isolated, especially during winter. The shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. Most nights blended together. This one started exactly the same way. I arrived around 9:45. The evening cashier gave me the usual rundown. Stock was good. No maintenance issues. No customer complaints. Nothing unusual. I settled in and started working. The first few hours were completely normal. A handful of customers came through. A truck driver bought coffee. A couple grabbed snacks. Someone filled up their tank and left. By midnight, the station had gone quiet. Around 12:30 a.m., I noticed a dark sedan pull into the parking lot. At first, I didn't think much of it. Vehicles came and went all night. But this one didn't pull up to a pump. Instead, it parked near the far edge of the lot, directly beside the abandoned diner across the road. The engine shut off. The lights went dark. The car stayed there. I glanced up a few minutes later. Still there. 10 minutes later. Still there. I figured someone was making a phone call. Maybe taking a nap. Not my business. Eventually, I stopped paying attention. Around 1:15 a.m., the door chime sounded. I looked up from stocking cigarettes. A man entered. Tall. Thin. Maybe mid-40s. Dark jacket. Dark baseball cap. He walked slowly through the store. Not browsing. Just wandering. His movements immediately stood out. Most customers move with purpose. They know what they want. This guy seemed more interested in looking around. Not at products, at the store itself, at me, at the exits, at the security cameras. I watched him for several minutes. Eventually, he grabbed a bottle of water and approached the register. When he reached the counter, he smiled. The smile wasn't threatening. It just felt rehearsed, like he was pretending to be friendly. He paid in cash, then asked a strange question. "Busy tonight?" I shrugged. "Not really." He nodded, looked around, then asked another question. "Do you work alone?" Every instinct I had immediately started screaming. I forced a casual smile. "No, manager's in the back." That was a lie. I was completely alone. The man looked disappointed, just for a second. Then he smiled again, said goodnight, and left. I watched him walk outside. He got into the sedan parked at the edge of the lot, then sat there, engine off, lights off, not leaving, just sitting. I remember feeling uneasy, but not alarmed. People are weird. Working overnight teaches you that quickly. I went back to stocking shelves. Around 2 a.m., I looked outside again. The sedan remained parked in exactly the same spot. The man was still inside, watching the station. That was when I started getting uncomfortable. I called my supervisor. Not because I thought a crime was happening, just because the situation felt strange. My supervisor laughed, said it was probably someone avoiding their spouse, or sleeping in their car, or waiting for roadside assistance. All reasonable explanations. I agreed, but I still kept checking the parking lot. The sedan never moved. At approximately 2:40 a.m., a truck pulled into the station. The driver came inside, bought coffee, used the restroom, left. As his headlights swept across the parking lot, I noticed something. The sedan was empty. I immediately sat up. I stared through the window. The driver's seat was vacant. The passenger seat was vacant. No movement, no person, nothing. I scanned the lot. No sign of the man. At first I assumed he was using the restroom, but I hadn't heard the door chime. Nobody had entered. Nobody had exited. I checked every aisle. Nothing. Then I checked the security monitors. Still nothing. The parking lot looked empty. The sedan sat motionless beneath a broken light pole. The man had vanished. I told myself not to be ridiculous. There were dozens of explanations. Maybe I'd simply missed him leaving. Maybe he was behind the building. Maybe he was walking around. Still, I locked the front door. Company policy allowed temporary lockups during overnight emergencies. I figured a few minutes wouldn't hurt. Then I conducted a quick walkthrough. Storage room, office, employee bathroom, utility closet. Nothing. No one. Feeling slightly foolish, I unlocked the door and returned to work. Around 3:15 a.m., the phone rang. The station phone almost never rang overnight. I answered. Silence. Complete silence. Hello. Nothing. I waited. Still nothing. Then the call disconnected. Annoying, but not particularly unusual. Wrong numbers happen. A few minutes later, the phone rang again. Same result. Silence. Then disconnect. My stomach started tightening. At 3:27 a.m., the phone rang a third time. This time I didn't answer immediately. After several rings, I picked up. Again, silence. Then a voice. Very quiet, barely above a whisper. "I know you're alone." The line disconnected. I just sat there, frozen. My heart immediately started pounding. I looked toward the parking lot. The sedan remained parked outside. Dark, silent, waiting. I locked the front door again, then called my supervisor. This time he took me seriously. He told me to contact the police, which I did. An officer agreed to stop by. Unfortunately, the nearest unit was nearly 20 minutes away, so I waited. Every minute felt longer than the last. The store remained empty. No customers, no vehículos, nothing, just me, the ringing phone, and the sedan. At approximately 3:40 a.m., I noticed movement. Not outside, inside, specifically on one of the security monitors. The camera covered the rear loading area behind the building. A shadow moved across the screen. Fast, too fast to identify. I immediately switched to another camera angle. Nothing. The loading area appeared empty. Then another camera flickered. A different angle. Again I saw movement. Someone walking behind the building. My pulse skyrocketed. There was definitely someone out there. I grabbed the emergency phone and called police again. The dispatcher assured me officers were close. While speaking with her, I continued watching the monitors. Then something happened that I still think about years later. The rear door handle moved. Not violently, not aggressively, just slowly, carefully, like someone testing it. The handle turned once, then again, then stopped. The dispatcher heard me swear. I explained what was happening. She told me officers were less than 5 minutes away. 5 minutes felt impossible. The handle moved again, then stopped. Silence. Complete silence. I watched the monitor. Nothing. No movement. No sado. No person. Then the front door chime sounded. I nearly jumped out of my skin. A customer had arrived. A woman, maybe in her 60s. She looked confused. The front door remained locked. I quickly ran over and explained through the glass. She immediately noticed something was wrong. When I told her police were on the way, she stepped back toward her vehicle, then suddenly stopped. Her expression changed. She pointed toward the side of the building. I followed her gaze. A man stood near the ice machine. The same man from earlier. The man who owned the sedan. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't running. He was simply standing there, watching. The woman immediately returned to her vehicle and locked her doors. I stayed inside. The man never approached, never spoke, never moved. He simply stood there, looking directly at the building. Then police arrived. The second patrol car entered the lot. The man walked away. Not ran, walked, calmly, toward the abandoned diner. Officers immediately pursued him. I watched everything unfold through the front windows. One officer approached the diner. The other checked the sedan. Minutes later, additional units arrived. The entire area lit up with flashing lights. Eventually, an officer entered the store. He asked several questions, then informed me they'd located the suspect. Sort of. The man had disappeared inside the abandoned diner. When officers searched the building, they found signs that someone had been staying there. Food, blankets, clothing, personal belongings. But no person. The suspect was gone. What disturbed everyone was what police found next. Inside the diner sat dozens of photographs. Most were pictures of the gas station. Pictures taken at night. Pictures taken over several months. Pictures of employees, customers, barriculas, delivery trucks, the parking lot, everything. The man had apparently been watching the station for a long time, far longer than anyone realized. Among the photographs were handwritten notes, shift schedules, employee descriptions, vehicle information, even details about which workers usually worked alone, including me. The realization made me feel sick. Police eventually identified the suspect several weeks later. He had a lengthy history of stalking-related offenses across multiple states. The exact reason he focused on our station was never fully determined. Investigators believed he had become obsessed with the location itself. The routines, the predictability, the people. Most of his behavior suggested surveillance rather than robbery, which honestly scared me more, because robbery has a clear motive. Obsession doesn't. The suspect was eventually arrested after a separate incident nearly 200 miles away. Authorities connected him to several similar cases involving businesses near highways, small locations, late-night workers, places where people developed predictable routines. I quit the gas station about 6 months later, not specifically because of that incident. At least that's what I told people. The truth is I never felt comfortable there again. Every time a car parked too long, I noticed. Every time the phone rang unexpectedly, I jumped. Every time someone asked if I worked alone, my stomach tightened. What sticks with me most isn't the phone call, or the rear door, or even the photographs. It's the fact that I initially ignored all the warning signs, because none of them seemed dramatic. One parked car, one strange customer, one odd question, one silent phone call. Individually, they felt harmless. Together, they painted a very different picture. A picture I didn't fully understand until police found those photographs. Sometimes people imagine dangerous situations starting with obvious threats. A masked intruder, a broken window, a weapon. Real life often begins much quieter. A person watching, a person learning, a person slowly inserting themselves into your routine until they know more about you than they should. Looking back, That's the part that scares me. Now it happened, but how long it was happening before anyone noticed. Because while I was working overnight shifts, stocking shelves, making coffee, and counting down the hours until sunrise, someone was sitting across the road studying everything, watching patterns, watching people, watching me. And if that woman hadn't arrived when she did, if police had been delayed a little longer, I honestly don't know what would have happened next. I don't spend much time thinking about it anymore. But every now and then, usually late at night, I'll stop at a gas station during a road trip. I'll see a vehicle sitting alone at the far edge of a parking lot. Engine off, lights off, just sitting there. And for a moment, I remember that dark sedan. The one that looked completely harmless. The one everyone could see. The one that stayed parked just a little too long. The one who turned out to be watching all along. Next story. I worked as a property maintenance technician for several apartment complexes across my city. Most people think maintenance work is pretty straightforward. Fix a leaking faucet. Replace a broken appliance. Patch drywall. Move on to the next work order. A lot of the job really is that simple. But one thing people don't think about is that maintenance workers often have access to places nobody else sees. Vacant apartments, utility rooms, storage areas, maintenance tunnels, crawl spaces, attics, places tenants rarely think about, places that can hide a lot more than people realize. For nearly 6 years, I never experienced anything particularly strange. I dealt with angry tenants, flooded units, electrical problems, the occasional police visit, nothing that really stuck with me. Then I started working at a complex called Pine Ridge. Even the name sounds creepy now. Back then, it just seemed like another apartment community. 3-story brick buildings, a couple hundred units, small gym, pool, laundry room, nothing special. The property sat near the edge of town beside a heavily wooded area. Behind the final row of buildings, the woods stretched for miles. Most tenants liked that. It made the place feel quiet, private, peaceful, at least during the day. At night, the woods felt completely different. Dark, silent, endless. I started working there in early spring. The first few months were completely normal. Routine repairs, routine inspections, routine complaints. Then the maintenance requests started appearing. At first they seemed unrelated. Small things, minor issues, the kind of requests that happen every day. One tenant claimed someone was moving objects around inside her storage closet. Another said items in his garage were appearing in different places. A third insisted someone had entered their apartment while they were gone. Management dismissed most of the complaints. There was never evidence of forced entry. Nothing valuable was missing. The stories sounded paranoid. Honestly, I agreed. People misplace things constantly. People forget things constantly. When you work maintenance long enough, you hear every possible theory. Ghosts, stalkers, neighbors sneaking around, government surveillance. Most of it turns out to be nonsense. That's what I assumed this was. Then one afternoon, I received a work order for a vacant unit. Unit 311. The tenant had moved out several weeks earlier. The apartment was empty and scheduled for renovation. The work order seemed simple. Replace damaged blinds, touch up paint, check smoke detectors. I grabbed my supplies and headed over. The apartment sat on the 3rd floor. As soon as I unlocked the door, something felt strange. Not dangerous, just strange. The air inside felt stale, heavier than normal, like the apartment had been closed up for a long time. Which didn't make sense because people had been entering regularly to prepare it for renovation. I stepped inside. Everything looked normal. Empty living room, empty kitchen, empty bedrooms. No furniture, no personal belongings. Nothing unusual. I completed most of the work without incident. Then I entered the 2nd bedroom. That's where I noticed it. A small pile of food wrappers sitting in the corner. At first I assumed another worker had left them behind, but the wrappers looked recent. Very recent. One of the drink bottles still contained liquid. I remember staring at it for a moment. The apartment had supposedly been empty for weeks, yet someone had clearly been inside recently. I cleaned up the trash and moved on. Not a huge deal, until I opened the bedroom closet. Inside sat a folded blanket and a pillow. I immediately stopped. That wasn't renovation material. That wasn't maintenance equipment. Someone had been sleeping there. I checked the rest of the apartment. Nothing else stood out. Eventually, I reported it to management. Their explanation seemed reasonable. Maybe a contractor, maybe another employee, maybe someone temporarily using the unit during breaks. Nobody seemed concerned, so I let it go. A week later, another vacant apartment produced a similar discovery. Food wrappers, blankets, water bottles. Again, evidence someone had been spending time inside. Again, management brushed it off. This time, though, something bothered me. The units weren't close together. They were in completely different buildings. Whoever was leaving these things wasn't accidentally forgetting them. They were moving between apartments. Then came a phone call. A tenant from Building C contacted the office. She sounded terrified. According to her, she woke up around 3 in the morning and saw a man standing outside her bedroom window. The problem? She lived on the second floor. Management assumed she had a nightmare. The police checked the area. Nothing. No footprints. No witnesses. No evidence. The report went nowhere. Still, tenants began talking. Rumors spread quickly. People started connecting unrelated events. Missing items. Strange noises. Unexplained movements. Soon everyone had a story. Most were probably exaggerated, but not all of them. A few weeks later, I was assigned another vacant unit inspection. This one changed everything. The apartment sat in Building F. Top floor. Corner unit. Vacant for nearly 2 months. I arrived around noon, unlocked the door, started my inspection. Everything looked fine until I reached the master bedroom. The closet door stood slightly open. Nothing unusual there. But when I pulled it open fully, I discovered something hidden behind several old paint buckets. A backpack. Not construction equipment. Not maintenance supplies. A backpack. I opened it. Inside were clothes, toothbrushes, batteries, canned food, flashlights, personal belongings. The realization hit me immediately. Someone wasn't occasionally entering these apartments. Someone was living in them. I contacted management right away. This time they couldn't dismiss it. Police responded and searched the unit. They treated it seriously. Unfortunately, they found no one. Only the backpack. No fingerprints. No useful evidence. Nothing. The investigation stalled almost immediately. Life returned to normal, or at least it tried to. Then residents started reporting noises, specifically above them. Footsteps, scraping sounds, movement in ceilings. At first, maintenance blamed animals. Raccoons, squirrels, birds, common explanations. Until I personally entered one of the attic spaces. Every building had a maintenance access hatch. Most employees hated going up there. The attics were cramped, dusty, hot in summer, freezing in winter. This particular inspection happened because multiple tenants complained about footsteps overhead. I climbed the ladder, opened the hatch, shined my flashlight inside. The beam illuminated insulation, wooden supports, electrical wiring, then something else, a folding chair. My stomach immediately tightened. Nobody should have placed a folding chair inside the attic, especially not in that location. I carefully climbed inside. The deeper I looked, the worse things became. Food containers, water bottles, blankets, flashlights, several makeshift sleeping areas. The attic wasn't empty. Someone had been living there. Not temporarily. Long term. I immediately climbed back down and called management. Police arrived again. This time they searched multiple attic spaces. What they discovered shocked everyone. Many of the buildings connected through maintenance passages and attic sections. Not perfectly, but enough. Someone had created pathways, small routes through areas tenants never saw. Investigators believe the person had been moving throughout the property for months, possibly longer. Living above residents, watching residents, using vacant apartments when needed. The discovery terrified people, myself included. For several nights afterward, police conducted surveillance. Nothing happened. No sightings, no arrests, no suspects. Eventually, people started relaxing again. Then one night, I got a call. Around 11 p.m., Emergency maintenance. A tenant reported water leaking from her ceiling. I drove over immediately. The tenant lived on the third floor. When I entered her apartment, she pointed toward the laundry room. Water dripped steadily from above. I sighed, probably a plumbing issue. I grabbed a ladder and opened the ceiling access panel. The second I looked inside, I knew something was wrong. Not because of the water, because someone was looking back at me. A face, human, less than 10 feet away, hidden in darkness, watching. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then the person bolted. I nearly fell off the ladder. The tenant started screaming. I called police while trying to explain what I'd seen. Officers arrived within minutes. For the first time, they had confirmation. Someone was actually up there. The entire property erupted into chaos. Police flooded the area. Residents gathered outside. Officers searched attics building by building for hours. Then shortly before sunrise, they found him. Or at least they found where he'd been staying. Deep inside one of the attic sections sat a surprisingly elaborate living space. Mattress, food, water, batteries, books, tools, even portable chargers. Whoever lived there had become incredibly comfortable, but the person himself escaped. Again, the story made local news. Residents panicked. Several moved out immediately. Management hired private security. Police increased patrols. Everyone expected an arrest within days. Instead, weeks passed. Nothing. No sightings. No clues. No suspect. Then everything changed. One security guard spotted someone entering the woods behind the property. Police responded quickly. This time, they didn't lose him. The suspect was finally arrested nearly a mile into the forest. The details that emerged afterward were disturbing. The man wasn't homeless. He wasn't a drifter. He wasn't some random trespasser. He had previously worked construction on the property years earlier. He knew the layout, the access points, the hidden spaces, everything. Investigators believed he'd secretly lived inside the complex for over a year, maybe longer, moving between vacant apartments, attics, storage rooms, maintenance areas, wherever he could avoid detection. What shocked everyone most wasn't what he stole, because surprisingly little was missing. Instead, investigators discovered notebooks, hundreds of pages, detailed observations about residents, schedules, habits, daily routines, who left for work at certain times, who lived alone, who received visitors, who didn't. The man had essentially spent years studying strangers, watching them, documenting them, learning their lives. The realization still makes me uncomfortable, because I work there every day. I probably passed him countless times. Maybe he watched me from an attic vent. Maybe he observed me entering apartments. Maybe he stood only a few feet away behind walls and ceilings while I worked. I'll never know. What I do know is that after the arrest, investigators showed management some of the recovered notes. One section focused specifically on maintenance employees, including me, my schedule, my vehicle, my routes, the times I typically entered certain buildings. Seeing that information written by a stranger felt violating in a way I can't fully explain. People often think fear comes from dramatic moments. The chase, the confrontation, the arrest. For me, the fear came afterward. When I realized how long he'd been there, how close he'd been, how completely invisible he remained despite living among hundreds of people. I eventually transferred to another property, not because management forced me. I just couldn't shake the feeling. Every attic hatch reminded me. Every vacant apartment reminded me. Every strange noise reminded me. Even now, years later, I still think about Pine Ridge occasionally, particularly when I'm staying in hotels or apartment buildings. Large buildings contain countless hidden spaces, places most people never see, places most people never think about. Ceilings, maintenance corridors, storage areas, access tunnels, attics. You assume those places are empty. Most of the time they are, but not always. And that's what still bothers me. For over a year, hundreds of people lived normal lives beneath that attic. They slept, ate dinner, watched television, raised families, completely unaware that someone was quietly living above them. Watching, learning, waiting, Not because he wanted money, not because he wanted property, simply because he wanted access to other people's lives. That's a kind of motivation I still don't understand. And honestly, I don't think I want to. Next story. I used to work overnight security at a self-storage facility on the outskirts of town. If you've never been inside one after midnight, it's hard to explain how strange those places feel. During the day, they're busy enough. People moving, loading trucks, dragging furniture, digging through old boxes. But once the gates close and everyone leaves, the entire property transforms. Hundreds of metal doors, long rows of storage units, narrow driveways, security lights casting pale yellow circles onto empty pavement. Everything becomes quiet, too quiet. Every sound echoes. Every movement feels amplified. A raccoon knocking over a soda can sound like a burglary in progress. The facility I worked at was one of the largest in the county. More than 1,000 units spread across several acres. Most nights were boring. I'd drive the property, check locks, respond to alarms, drink too much coffee, fight to stay awake until sunrise. I actually liked the job. The solitude suited me. The pay wasn't great, but it was easy work. At least that's what I thought during my first year. Then I started noticing something strange. It began with Unit E-117, a fairly ordinary unit near the back fence. Nothing special about it. The renter was an older man named Richard. He paid on time, never caused problems, barely spoke to anyone. One night around 2 a.m., I was driving past E building when I noticed a thin line of light beneath his door. That wasn't unusual by itself. Customers occasionally received after-hours access. Maybe he was organizing boxes. Maybe he forgot something. I made a note and continued my patrol. The next night, I saw the light again. Same unit, same time. I drove closer. The light vanished. I parked nearby and waited. Nothing happened. After about 10 minutes, I left. The following night, it happened again. This time, curiosity got the better of me. I approached on foot. As I got closer, I heard movement inside. Not loud movement, soft movement, like someone carefully shifting boxes. I knocked. The sound stopped instantly. Storage facility security, I called. No response. I knocked again. Still nothing. I stood there for nearly a minute. Silence. Finally, I walked away. As soon as I reached the next row, I heard movement begin again. Slow, deliberate, almost cautious. The next morning, I checked the account. Richard hadn't requested overnight access. In fact, he hadn't visited the property in nearly 3 weeks. I called my supervisor. He wasn't concerned. Maybe the records were wrong. Maybe someone forgot to log entry. Maybe Richard gave access to a family member. There were plenty of explanations. So I dropped it for a while. A week later, I met Richard. Or at least I thought I did. I was locking the front office around closing time when an older man approached. Gray hair, baseball cap, thick glasses. He introduced himself as Richard, the renter of E-117. He said he'd received a voicemail asking about activity in his unit. I explained what I'd seen. The entire conversation lasted maybe 2 minutes. But something felt off. Not suspicious exactly, just strange. The man didn't seem curious. Most people would ask questions, want details. Instead, he just nodded, thanked me, then left. A few days later, I learned why the interaction bothered me. The real Richard had died 2 months earlier. I found out completely by accident. A woman came into the office requesting access to his account. She explained she was handling his estate. I immediately felt cold. I asked when Richard passed away. She told me the date, 2 months earlier. The same month, the late-night activity started. I didn't tell her about the man who claimed to be Richard. Honestly, I wasn't even sure what I'd seen. People forget faces. Maybe I was mistaken. Maybe it was another relative. Still, the situation unsettled me. Management changed the locks on the unit. Problem solved. Or so we thought. The following week, I discovered the new lock removed. Not broken. Removed. The original lock sat neatly on the ground. The replacement lock was gone. The unit remained closed. No signs of forced entry. No signs of damage. It made absolutely no sense. Police were contacted. They looked around, took notes, found nothing. Without evidence, there wasn't much they could do. Eventually, the estate representative emptied the unit. Everything inside appeared normal. Furniture, boxes, old clothes, photographs, nothing unusual. Once emptied, the unit was rented again. The strange activity stopped. For a while. Then another unit started. Different building, different renter, different circumstances. Same pattern. Lights, movement. No wuseresasjen. No explanation. At first, I thought someone had figured out how to sneak onto the property. Maybe they were using vacant units. Maybe they were living inside one. It wouldn't have been impossible. The facility was enormous. Finding someone could take hours. But every investigation came up empty. Every time. One night around 3:30 a.m., I received an alarm notification from Building K. Motion sensor activation. The sensor covered a rarely used hallway between climate-controlled units. I drove over immediately. The hallway was empty. No people. No vehículos. Nothing. Then I heard a door close. Not slam. Close. Somewhere deeper in the building. I started walking. The sound echoed through the corridor. Metal doors lined both sides. Hundreds of them. Every one identical. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I moved slowly, listening. A faint scraping sound drifted from farther ahead. Then another, and another. Almost like someone dragging something heavy across concrete. I followed the noise. The farther I walked, the quieter it became. Until finally it stopped altogether. I reached the end of the hallway. Nothing. No people. No movement. No open units. Just silence. Then I noticed something. A storage unit about 20 feet away had a shadow beneath the door. Not unusual, except the shadow moved. I froze. The movement lasted less than a second, like someone stepping back from the inside. I approached cautiously. The lock remained secured. The door appeared closed. Everything looked normal. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling someone was standing directly behind it, watching. I called out. No answer. I knocked. Nothing. Eventually, I left. The next morning, management contacted the renter, an elderly woman. She lived 3 states away, hadn't visited in nearly a year. The unit should have been empty except for store belongings. Yet somehow I'd watched a shadow move inside. I couldn't explain it. Neither could anyone else. Over the next few months, things escalated. Tenants began reporting missing items. Not valuable items. That's what made it weird. Small things. Photographs. Books. Personal letters. Children's drawings. Random keepsakes. The kind of objects nobody would normally steal. At first, management suspected tenants were misplacing them. Then multiple complaints arrived. Then dozens. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Someone was entering units. Not to steal valuables. To take personal things. That realization made everyone uncomfortable, including the police. Unfortunately, there was still no suspect. No footy. No evidence. Nothing. The cameras never showed anyone entering after hours. The gates never recorded unauthorized access. Yet the incidents continued. One rainy Thursday night, everything finally changed. I was conducting a routine patrol around 1:45 a.m. when I noticed something near the rear fence. A gate. Open. Not fully open. Just enough for someone to slip through. That gate should have been locked. Always. I parked and approached. The chain hung loose. Someone had removed it. Beyond the fence sat several acres of dense woods. The trees stretched into darkness. My flashlight barely penetrated the undergrowth. I should have called police immediately. Instead, I stepped through. Looking back, that was incredibly stupid. The woods felt unnaturally quiet. No insects. No birds. Nothing. I followed a narrow trail for maybe 200 yards. Then my flashlight landed on something. A structure. Small. Hidden among the trees. Not quite a cabin. Not quite a shed. Just a crude shelter built from scavenged materials. Tarps. Plywood. Scrap metal. My stomach tightened. Someone had clearly been living there. I moved closer. The smell hit first. Rotting food. Damp clothing. Stale air. Inside the shelter sat boxes. Stacks of boxes. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. I opened one. Photographs. Family photos. Thousands of photographs. Another box contained journals. Another held children's artwork. Another contained letters. Every missing item reported over the previous year seemed to be there. I immediately backed away and called police. While waiting, I kept my flashlight on the structure, partly to preserve the scene, partly because I suddenly felt like I wasn't alone. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. We returned together. The shelter was empty, but investigators quickly realized something disturbing. The boxes represented years of thefts. Not months, years. Possibly even a decade. Whoever built that place had been collecting pieces of strangers' lives for an incredibly long time. The discovery made local news. People became terrified. Storage unit rentals dropped. Customers demanded answers. Unfortunately, there weren't many. Police searched the woods extensively. No suspect, no fingerprints, no useful DNA, nothing. Weeks passed. Then one night I saw him. At least I think I did. It happened around 4 a.m., the end of my shift. I was driving past Building C when movement caught my eye. A person stood between two rows of units, perfectly still, watching me. I stopped the vehicle. The figure remained motionless. Even from a distance, something felt wrong. I couldn't make out details. Just a silhouette. Tall, thin, unnaturally still. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The second the beam touched him, he turned and walked away. Not ran, walked, calmly, almost casually. I followed. He disappeared between buildings. I rounded the corner seconds later. Gone. Completely gone. No place to hide. No open units. No vehicles. Nothing. Just empty pavement. I searched for nearly 30 minutes. Nothing. When I reviewed camera footage later, things got even stranger. The cameras showed me chasing someone, but the person appeared only briefly. A dark figure crossing one frame, then another, then nothing. No exit. No disappearance. Just gone. Police couldn't explain it. Neither could I. After that night, my anxiety skyrocketed. Every shift felt different. Every noise felt significant. Every shadow demanded attention. I started seeing movement everywhere. Sometimes I glanced down a row of units and think someone was standing there. Then they'd be gone. Other times I'd hear footsteps. Soft footsteps, just beyond sight, always disappearing before I could locate them. Eventually, I began questioning myself. Maybe exhaustion was getting to me. Maybe stress. Maybe paranoia. Then came the final incident. The one that convinced me something truly dangerous had been happening. It was late autumn. Cold. Windy. The facility had almost no customers that day. Around midnight, I received an alarm from one of the oldest buildings. Building A. The first structure ever constructed on the property. I headed over immediately. The alarm indicated unauthorized entry. As I approached, I noticed one unit partially open. Only a few inches. That alone was unusual. Then I recognized the unit number. A12. It had been vacant for years. The company used it for storage occasionally. Otherwise, it remained empty. I drew closer. The door stood open enough to reveal darkness inside. My flashlight illuminated concrete walls. Dust. Nothing else. I stepped forward. The beam moved deeper into the unit, then froze. Someone was standing at the back, watching me, not moving, not speaking, just standing there. I immediately backed away and called police. The figure never moved. Not once. It simply stood in darkness, watching. The police arrived quickly. Several officers approached together, weapons drawn. They entered. Seconds later, one officer called us inside. The figure wasn't a person. It was a mannequin, an old store mannequin positioned against the rear wall. But that's not what scared us. What scared us were the photographs. Thousands of them, covering every wall. Photographs of tenants, employees, customers, children, families, workers. Me. Hundreds of photos of me. Some taken while I patrolled, others while I sat inside the office. A few were clearly taken from outside my apartment. The realization hit like a punch to the stomach. Whoever had been stealing those keepsakes wasn't just collecting memories. He was creating his own. Investigators later found evidence connecting the room to the shelter in the woods. The same person, the same obsession, The same behavior. Yet despite everything they uncovered, they never found him. No arrest. No identificación. Nothing. The case eventually faded from public attention. The storage facility changed ownership. Management changed. Employees changed. Life moved on. I quit shortly afterward. Not because I was physically harmed. Because I couldn't shake the feeling. The feeling that someone had spent years quietly studying people. Watching them. Following them. Building entire collections devoted to strangers. And somehow remained invisible. What bothers me most isn't what police found. It's what they didn't find. The photographs only represented a fraction of the missing items. Thousands of objects were never recovered. Thousands, meaning there were likely other locations, other hiding places, other collections. Maybe they're still out there somewhere, sitting in forgotten buildings, hidden in woods, waiting to be discovered. And every now and then, when I'm driving late at night and pass a self-storage facility, I think about those endless rows of metal doors, all those locked spaces, all those hidden belongings, all those private pieces of people's lives stored out of sight. Most of the time, they're exactly what they appear to be, just storage units. But after what happened at that facility, I know better than to assume that. Because sometimes the people watching aren't after money. They aren't after valuables. They aren't even after breaking in. Sometimes they're after something much stranger. Access, connection, control. The feeling of being part of someone else's life without permission. And that's the kind of person who scares me most. Because unlike ordinary criminals, people like that can stand right in front of you for years without ever being noticed.